as you know, is an English writer, and he's been honored by the Nobel Prize in 2001. He has received, anyway, all the prizes, literal prizes. So the novel has been the last one, but every other prize was honored by. He's as I said, an English writer. He has a long way in his work, and start from a novel and so fiction and to arrive in non-fiction. He will read a part of this book, Reading and Writing, in which he explained a little bit how was the itinerary that he did to arrive and from where he started and where he arrived in writing and in explaining him in his work. I want just to ask you, if you have any question, please just write in English, of course. And after somebody will keep and will just answer at the end. When Sir Naipaul will have finished to read his pages, we'll make question and answer. Maybe part of the questions that I will do will be what you would like to ask by yourself, and something that you want to ask, please write on the paper. Thank you. So you can read the...
Read now?
You read now.
In my fantasy of being a writer, there had been no idea how I might actually go about writing a book. I suppose I couldn't be sure that there was a vague notion in the fantasy that once I had done the first book, the others would follow. I found it wasn't like that. Is this okay?
No, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
No.
Because I feel that I'm getting no echo or anything from it.
Mine is much stronger.
Okay. Is it better now?
Yes.
I found it wasn't like that. The material I had didn't permit it. In those early days, every new book meant facing the old blankness again and going back to the beginning. And I must say that is true even to this day. You know, when I'm nearly 80, and thinking of myself as being near the end of things, and if I start thinking about writing a book, it's just like that. So it's something that recurs in writing, for me at any rate. The later books came like the first, driven only by the wish to do a book, with an intuitive or innocent or desperate grasping at ideas, at material, without fully understanding where they might lead. Knowledge came with the writing. Each book took me to deeper understanding. And that led to a different way of writing. Every book was a stage in the process of finding out. It couldn't be repeated. My material, my past, separated from me by place as well, was fixed and, like childhood itself, complete. It couldn't be added to. This way of writing consumed it, consumed the childhood and the material connected with childhood. Within 5 years, I had come to an end. My writing imagination was like a chalk-scrawled blackboard, wiped clean in stages, and at the end, blank again, tabula rasa. Fiction had taken me as far as it could go. There were certain things it couldn't deal with. It couldn't deal with my years in England. There was no social depth to the experience. It seemed more a matter for autobiography. And it couldn't deal with my growing knowledge of the wider world. Fiction, by its nature, functioning best within certain fixed social boundaries, seemed to be pushing me back to worlds like the island world, or the world of my childhood, smaller than the one I inhabited. Fiction, which had once liberated me and enlightened me, now seemed to be pushing me towards being simpler than I really was. For some years, 3, perhaps 4, I didn't know how to move. I was quite lost. Nearly all my adult life had been spent in countries where I was a stranger. I couldn't, as a writer, go beyond that experience. To be true to that experience, I had to write about people in that kind of position. I found ways of doing so, but I never ceased to feel it as a constraint. If I had had to depend only on the novel as a form, I would probably have soon found myself without the means of going on, though I had trained myself in prose narrative and was full of curiosity about the world and people. But there were other forms that met my need. Accident had fairly early on brought me a commission to travel in the former slave colonies of the Caribbean and the old Spanish Main. The Spanish Main is South America, just below the Caribbean Sea. I had accepted that commission for the sake of the travel. I hadn't thought much about the form. I had an idea that the travel book was a glamorous interlude in the life of a serious writer. But the writers I had had in mind, and there could have been no others, were metropolitan people. Aldous Huxley, D.H. Lawrence, Evelyn Waugh. I was not like them. They wrote at a time of empire. Whatever the character at home, they inevitably in their travel became semi-imperial, using the accidents of travel to define their metropolitan personalities against a foreign background. My travel was not like that. I was a colonial traveler in New World plantation colonies, which were like the one I had grown up in. To look as a visitor at other semi-derelict communities in the spoiled land, in the great romantic setting of the New World, was to see, as from a distance, what one's own community might have looked like. It was to be taken out of oneself and one's immediate circumstances, the material of fiction, and to have a new vision of that, of what one had been born into, and to have an intimation of a sequence of historical events going far back. I had trouble with the form. I didn't know how to travel for a book. I traveled as though I was on holiday, and then floundered, looking for the narrative. I had trouble with the I, the first person singular of the travel writer. I thought that as a traveler and narrator, he, that I, was in unchallenged command and had to make big judgments. For all its faults, the book, like the fiction books that had gone before, was for me an extension of knowledge and feeling. It wouldn't have been possible for me to unlearn what I had learned. Fiction, the exploration of one's immediate circumstances, had taken me a lot of the way. Travel had taken me further. Now, should I carry on or should I stop there?
Stop.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You start? Okay.
Is it all right?
Wonderful. Okay. So I just want to ask you, When you say, just in the beginning, you say that when you start, you have almost no idea how you could write and what you write. And I think it's more or less it's the same creative process that happens, I don't know, to a painter or to a sculptor. There's something, and it's like any creative person has a moment in which says, what will do, what I will do, or even I'm doing something good, will be good the next that I will do. What really gave you the idea to start the first book? From where you start? What was the click that came to your mind and you say, okay, now I can write it?
The first book or
the first book?
Well, just a wish to be a writer.
Just to be, it was just a wish.
To have one's name on the spine of a book.
Yes.
To become famous.
That is always the good moment. and you afforded, so it was great.
But then that was the initial impulse, and the rest was just worry about how to fulfill that ambition.
Yeah. But when you write, I say just in the beginning, when you write the first book, I never thought, of course, about to become famous, you said, but even what could be your idea to write only about, you start with fiction. So what's about fiction, your general idea to do in the book, or was just you start because the kind of fiction it was even the people around you?
Yes, you would begin like that. You would begin with that. That's what you begin, that's the material in your head. And that's what you have to use. And what happens is that when that material is very limited, as mine was, you come to an end of it very quickly. And then there is real trouble for you if you want to be a writer. You don't know what to do next. And you can spend a lot of years like that. And as I said, if I think about writing now, I'm back in that same place. This wish about getting material is an eternal for a writer. Some people don't have the trouble. Let's suppose someone like, choose an example which many people would know. Choose Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie knows she has to do a book which they used to call, the publishers, A Christie for Christmas. And she had to have a country house setting. She had to people it in a certain way. And she had to have a mystery. And she knew what to do. So she could do the same thing again and again and again. It didn't really mean that she was looking for the new, or no, she wasn't looking for that. And there were other writers too in Victorian times when people wrote about, a kind of social world. What they did was they could just write and write and write. Once you establish your world, your culture, and the rules of that world, you can just go on. Not only Victorians do it, people do it now for the television. You know, the television, the situation comedy. You can do situation comedy about anything. You can do it about a school. You could have, imagine a new teacher coming, a bad teacher being thrown out. You can do anything like that. You can do it about a post office. Different people coming in to work in the post office. Some people doing it badly. Some little person wanting to be a trade union agitator. You know, any number of ideas for plots will then occur to you. But if you don't write like that, if you wish something to reflect the truth of your experience, then you're going to have a bit of trouble.
Yeah. You are known as not to be a writer that wants to please the readers. You are known as somebody that really wants to give the truth to the readers. And in the beginning with the fiction, even if it was a fiction, it was anyway the world around you, where you rise up and the people around you. And you said that if you should go on with fiction, you will be dried up in 4 or 5 years.
Oh, yes.
So that's why you started to travel, and even if it was in a different way to travel, and even after you were more and more involved by people and the world and really the problems.
Yes.
You never really been as far. I mean, in your book, you've always been very interested what's happened to the people, how they come from, what's happened in their own way. So but real people. That's why.
Yes, and even with the traveling, I learned a lot more as I went on, and my big discovery, a very obvious one, but you'll see how important it is, was that the most important thing in a travel book was not the writer, but the people among whom he was traveling. So that was a great discovery. So you start looking out at yourself, and you eventually arrive at a new form. The form is this form of traveling on a theme, traveling to find out, traveling to look at people. All this sounds quite obvious, but you know, it takes time to learn how to do it, how to go about it. And then I began to do traveling on historical developments. One of them, for example, was the Islamic awakening. That took a lot of my energy in the late 70s. It was very interesting to me, going to these places, not in the Arab world, outside the Arab world. And that I gathered all that information and realized, when the book was published, that very few people had done this labor. It was a new way of going about the world, looking at it. I've just done a similar kind of labor. I went to Africa. I didn't go to Africa to look for the politics, which everyone knows about, or the economics, everyone again knows about that. I wanted to try to understand as much as I could about the nature of African belief. So I've just done that. I wouldn't have had the courage to do this 20 or 30 years ago, because I hadn't done much in that line. So it's a developing process. And whereas in the beginning I wanted to write in order to learn about the world, so I began to travel to learn about the world, but in a very profound way, the way of almost a travel writer.
Yeah, in fact, in another part of the book that you didn't read, there are kind of 3 steps in your work. You start from fiction, and after you travel and you explain how, and afterwards even a moment in which you travel trying to make documents and to go into the historical part and to see.
Yes.
And you say in the end, all these added different steps to what you did today, and that's what you were explaining, to go
Yes.
inside in the people.
Yes.
And even all the Islamic
Yes.
province,
Yes.
so made in 4 different countries, but not by historical, but going really through the people and really through
Yes.
the real.
Yes.
This is kind of, let's say, non-fiction, because in a way, when you read your book, you are interested from the beginning to the end, like if you read a story, let's say fiction, but you know that everything is true, everything is the reality. So that was your point, to arrive and to make people to participate to the real life of the other people, to discover that people have a different
Yes.
needs around the world.
Yes. And when I do that other kind of fiction, that other kind of writing, I'm very concerned to be extraordinarily accurate, to get it as right as possible, not to falsify what I've been seeing or to falsify the evidence, but to record it, because what you are recording, you may not always understand at the moment of recording. It will have greater meaning to you later. In a way, it's like, I suppose, doing kind of detective work. You know, you must record everything that you do, and later, things which don't say much at the beginning will say a lot more to you.
Yeah. Now that's why what you just let's say we have many more books about fiction. Every day you go in the bookshop and you find thousands of new books. Everybody's writing books.
Yes, yes.
And what is for you the situation of this book, of this fiction that they sell? And some of them they even sell well, you know, in a way, because they are very easy. They are very, like you say, Agatha Christie or
Yes,
many
yes,
other. We can make many other
Yes, yes,
names.
yes.
Do you think that in a world in which has so many needs and changing so quick and there are so many interesting things, you really need to lose time, to waste your time to read the fiction?
Well, you know, it's a good question, actually. It's a good question. It might be a waste of time. It might be a waste of time. Because very few imaginations have that incandescent quality that will light up a whole world or new scene for you. What you would get mainly would be a kind of, I'm speaking generally, a feeble imagination doing things which are obvious and which have been done before, which doesn't really help anybody. And I feel that fiction may not be as important today as it was in 1850. In 1850, the writing of fiction was probably the equivalent of the cinema, the theater, all these things combined, because it was the one thing where people could lose themselves in imagination. It isn't like that today. And the people who think it is are probably going to be in a lot of trouble. You see, even a writer like Dickens, he seems to me to come to the end of his inspiration quite soon. The early Dickens is marvelous, very new, but then he gets to the end of that material and he begins to deal with things in his own tricky way. He does little games, which we all know about. So it is a problem. It is a problem for writing. How in a world where there are endless television serials and comedies, endless magazines, endless films, what room can there be for the man who writes to the printed page, which excites the imagination in a different way? I don't know whether people believe this. They think, nonetheless, I will go ahead and write my novel, or my 2 novels, and then I'll have nothing more to say, but I'll still have written my novels, you know? Yeah. Are there any number of people who give you courses how to write a novel? This is so strange, isn't it? They don't tell you how to paint a masterpiece. They don't tell you how to do nice sculpture, but they tell you how you can write a book. And so we have many interesting examples now. People from all over the world going to these writing courses, bringing their separate experience. And that experience is being trained by the writing courses to come out in exactly the same way. So you have many people who are preparing to write the same book. And this might seem a kind of universality, or it might be a kind of tedium, actually. And I think probably it is tedium. It is tedium.
No, because in a way, if I can compare, of course, it's a completely different way. As we are living in an era that is completely about vision, people that are images, and they read less than what they look at and what they're used to look. Maybe a little bit is the same for me. The fiction is what's happening even in the magazine, because we are all trying to go in a way to find something new. At the end, we become all similar.
Yes.
And for me, it's the same what's happening in the image and in the fiction. You read a book and you seem that you have read many other times. And sometimes you open a magazine, and I'm in a magazine, so I'm not talking about everyone else, I'm talking about myself, that it seems that you have already seen this image. So that's why I think that the life is much more fantasy than the fiction.
Yes.
And maybe even more than to do fiction books, it's better to read real life. And maybe sometimes it's better to leave Photoshop and to leave, this fake image and to go back to real life, to real people. So this is, I think it's a problem in a different way in the literature and in the vision. I think it's in a different way, of course, but we are more or less in the same step. Both of us, we have to decide in which way to go.
Well, it's a big problem. It's a big, not only for writing. I think it might be extended to other arts that have been left behind by the modern world, like painting. It seems to me that after Western painting, after the discovery of perspective and other tricks like that.
That's not the question. We have it.
And then later, Cézanne and Van Gogh. After these people, there are no new discoveries. And so the visual arts themselves are appearing to be idle, not doing anything. But I think that people in the audience might have views about this. You know, there are different views in this matter.
Nadira, you have some questions? Maybe, yes, we have some questions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There are some questions.
Do you want to... I give you mine.
No, I think I can manage. Can you hear me? Well, Vidya, most of the questions that have come, I think you have answered them, but you can do it again. Some of them are interesting and short. Do you watch movies? What are your favorites? Do you watch movies?
I stopped in about 1950. I don't know why I stopped. I think it was because I thought the great films of the 30s and 40s had a kind of social point. And if you look at them again these days, we just talked in Aldra about a film called High Sierra with Ida Lupino and Bogart. It's very moving still. Quite different from the stuff that's coming out of America now, which is full of tricks, technically very accomplished, but none of that social point, which gave a lot of zest to the early Hollywood films. So I just couldn't go to them. And I don't see, and even when they're shown on the aeroplanes, which is where they end up, it's a version of the video shop, you know? They get shown in the aeroplanes. Even then they don't hold me. They don't hold me.
It says Sir Naipaul. I've corrected it. It's put Lord Naipaul. It was Sir Naipaul. As an American, I must commend you on your portrait of a redneck. Thank you. That's a compliment to you. Now you have, when I'm unable to create, I'm quite lost. How does it feel not to create?
Not to?
Create. The question is, when I'm unable to create,
yes,
I'm quite lost. How does it feel not to write?
That's a personal question, I suppose, because as I said, I'm getting near the end, and it's a great problem for me now, how to live, how to spend one's time without having work to do. I suppose it's not only a writer, I suppose everyone who does a job in the world comes to this position near retirement. How is he going to spend his time? There is no solution.
Okay.
There's no solution. I'm just hoping for a bit of magic, that I will be inspired to do something else, which will then occupy me. But then the problem will occur again at the end of that process, hard one though it may be, it will all start all over again. How having written this hard-won book, how am I going to go on and get another one and another one? It's like becoming 30 or 40 again, you know? Difficult.
In your writing, there are passing references to aspects of Roman history and society. What is your fascination with Roman culture and history? I'm a friend of the late Jim Allen.
I think Jim Allen is a man I met in Africa in 1966 and became quite attached to. I was hoping to go and see him. He was connected with the Fort Jesus Museum in Mombasa, I think. But by the time I could make my arrangements to go there, he died. So it was the loss of a great friend. But that's something else that happens with age, which explains why writers can, as it were, suffer. People die around you. And you are left less and less connected to the world. And you have to you have to do what you can do with that difficult situation.
But the question is your fascination with Roman history.
Oh, yes.
That's not Jim Allen.
Oh, I was answering the second part.
The first part is Roman history. Your fascination with Roman history and society.
Well, it was a happy accident at school that I was taught Roman history for a couple of years by a kind of gifted teacher who never taught with a book in his hand, but had mastered the material sufficiently to make it appear to be a continuous narrative. And it held me. It held me, and that is the start of it. And I've since tried to add and add to my knowledge because it's a magnificent subject for study, the ancient world, because it has created the world in which we live. So that's the fascination. There are certain places that don't fascinate me because there is not the great feeding of the later world, which occurred through Rome. I suppose I'm interested too in the great story of power being an accumulation of talent in any old city, any old civilization, and then expressing itself. I'm also interested in this thing about power fading away. Every 600 years there appears, even with great powers, things to fade away. That's a feeble thing, but
okay.
It's all I want to go into at the moment.
All right, here's a question. Now that you've nailed writing, is there anything else you'd like to tackle?
No, can't talk like that, because that's a life. That requires an immense dedication. It's a vocation. You have to give your life to it. It isn't something you do casually. It isn't something you do as an aspect of other things. No, writing is very, very important. Writing is, after all, a way of looking at the world, looking at life. It's a very profound study. So I can't do anything else, no.
I think we'll take 2 or 3 more questions because we're running out of time. Okay. And this question is, what can you tell us about your forthcoming book, The Mask of Africa?
I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
It is not about political Africa or economic Africa, which everyone knows about. I really wanted to get an idea of the philosophical underpinning or the religious underpinning of the African cultures. And that was fascinating to me. Again, it was a discovery. And the greater difficulty, of course, was not understanding the people. It was going past the governments that are very difficult nowadays about their visas, you know? They don't want you in. So you might have trouble there.
2 more, last 2.
Okay.
Do you think writing is also therapy? Do you have such a feeling?
Writing is therapy.
Do you look at it as a form of therapy?
No. That was sent me by a criminal. I bought a flat in London, I still have it, and the man across the way had a bad background. And one day on the roof, he was writing, and I asked him what he was writing. He said, therapy. He's writing about himself. Therapy. Really, he should simply have just gone to jail quietly and ended it there, you know? But the therapy was no, writing is not therapy.
Okay, I think that's it. There is a question, but I don't know whether, well, I will ask you. It says, how does Turkey, with its non-Arab Muslim population, fit into your well-developed thesis about converted Muslim societies?
Well, Turkey is a great mystery to me. You know, I don't know a lot about it. I think the whole business of Turkey is such a wonder and a mystery, because the land of Turkey was the land of the classical world. Herodotus, the historian, the Greek historian, came from Halikarnassus, which is in Western Turkey now. And all this land was so much part of the Roman Empire, one wonders then how it should have changed and become something else. I would like to learn more about that. I know very little about it at the moment. I would like to learn some more. I think, Franca, that's it.
I think it's it.